Ranjani from Department of English, MSN College, Pune. In this video, I am going to explain about the poem The Shield of Achilles. It was written by Weston Q. Auden. We are going to see the following things in the video. Author introduction, The Shield of Achilles poem, The Shield of Achilles introduction, summary, themes. Weston Q. Auden, W.H. Auden, was born on 21st February 1907 and he was died on 29 September 1973. He was a British American poet. He has both the citizenship. Auden's poetry was noted for its stylistic and technical achievement, its engagement with politics, morals, love and religion, and its variety in tone, form and content. English poet, playwright, critic and librettist Weston Q. Auden, that is W.H. Auden, exerted a major influence on the poetry of the 20th century. He was born in New York and grew up in Birmingham in a professional middle-class family. He attended various English independent or public schools and studied English at Christ Church, Oxford. After a few months in Berlin in 1928 to 29, he spent 5 years from 1930 to 35 teaching in British private preparatory schools. Then he travelled to Iceland and China to write books about his journeys. Auden grew up in Birmingham, England, and was known for his extraordinary intellect and wit. In 1939, he moved to the United States and became an American citizen in 1946, retaining his British citizenship. He came to wide public attention with his first book, Poems, at the age of 23 in 1930. The first book was published in 1930 with the help of T.S. Eliot. It was followed in 1932, The Orators. Three plays written in collaboration with Christopher Isherwood between 1935 and 1938 built his reputation as a left-wing political writer. His other works are long poems, for the time being The Sea and the Mirror, focused on religious themes. Auden was a prolific writer of prose essays and reviews on literary, political, psychological and religious subjects, and he worked at various times on documentary films, poetic plays and other forms of performance. He won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry for his 1947 long poem, The Age of Anxiety, and the title of which became a popular phrase describing the modern era. From 1956 to 1961, he was professor of poetry at Oxford. His lectures were popular with students and faculty and served as the basis for his 1962 prose collection, The Dyer's Hand. He was popularized as the greatest mind of 20th century. After his death, his poems became known to a much wider public through films, broadcast and popular media. The Shield of Achilles, it is a poem by W.H. Auden, first published in 1952, and the title work of the collection of poems by Auden, published in 1955. The poem is based on a story from the Iliad, that is a great epic, in which the goddess Thetis asks Hephaestus, god of blacksmiths and craftspeople, to make new armor for her son, the great Greek warrior Achilles. In Greek mythology, Achilles was a hero of Trojan War, the greatest of all Greek warriors, and the central character of Homer's Iliad. Thetis expects Hephaestus to forge a beautiful shield filled with romantic ornamentation that glorifies war and battle as is the case in the original myth. Hephaestus is the god of blacksmiths and fire, called the celestial artificer. He was also associated with other craftsmen, sculptors, carpenters and metalworks. Hephaestus is making a shield for Achilles. Thetis was the goddess of the sea and the leader of the 50 Nereids Nereids and the mother of Achilles. She eagerly comes and watches the shield which is made for her son Achilles and suggests for desirable, beautiful sceneries to the carved in it, to be carved in it. Let us read the poem to see what is carved in it. And this collection in which it was earned Auden a National Book Award. Let us read the poem now. The shield of Achilles. She looked over her shoulder for vines and olive trees, marble well governed cities, and ships upon untamed seas, but there on the shining metal his hands had put instead an artificial wilderness and a sky like lead. A plain without a feature, bare and brown, no blade of grass, no sign of neighborhood, nothing to eat and nowhere to sit down, yet congregated on its blankness stood an unintelligible multitude. A million eyes, a million boots and line, without expression, waiting for a sign. Out of the air, a voice without a face, proved by statistics that some cause was just in tones as dry and level as the place. No one was cheered and nothing was discussed. Column by column, in a cloud of dust, they marched away, enduring a belief whose logic brought them somewhere else to grief. She looked over her shoulder for ritual pieties, white flower garlanded heifers, libation and sacrifice, but there on the shining metal, where the altar should have been, she saw by his flickering forge light quite another scene. Barbed wire enclosed an arbitrary spot where board officials launched one cracked a joke and sentries sweated for the day was hot. A crowd of ordinary decent folk watched from without and neither moved nor spoke as three pale figures were led forth and bound, three posts driven upright in the ground. The mass and majesty of this world, all that carries weight and always weighs the same, lay in the hands of others. They were small and could not hope for help, and no help came. What their foes liked to do was done, their shame was all the worst could wish. They lost their pride and died as men before their bodies died. She looked over her shoulder for athletes at their games, men and women in a dance, moving their sweet limbs, quick, quick to music. But there on the shining shield, his hands had set no dancing floor, but a weed choked field. A ragged urchin, aimless and alone, loitered about that vacancy. A bird flew up to safety from his well aimed stone. That girls are raped, that two boys knife a third. Were anxious to him who had never heard of any world where promises were kept, or one could weep because another wept. The thin-lipped armorer Hephaestus hopped away, the touch of the shining breast, cried out in a dismay at what the god had wrought to please her son, the strong, iron-hearted man slaying Achilles, who would not live long. Let us see the summary of the poem. It is Auden's response to the detailed description of the shield borne by the hero Achilles in Homer's epic poem, the Iliad. The shield of Achilles is a powerful reflection of war-related violence. In the poem, Auden questions the validity of traditional notions of honor and fair war in an age in which war has become mechanized and impersonal. The poem reimagines a scene from the ancient Greek epic, the Iliad, in which the goddess Thetis watches Hephaestus, god of blacksmiths and metalworking, among other things, craft armor for her son Achilles of Trojan war frame. Thetis expects Thetis, the god of water and sea, Thetis expects Hephaestus to forge a beautiful shield filled with romantic ornamentation that glorifies war and battle, as is the case in the original myth. In the poem, however, Thetis finds only images of a bleak desolation and an horror upon the shield. Written in the decade after World War II, the poem contains references to the events and technologies of 20th century conflicts and explores the relationship between war and modern society. The collection in it, which it was published, earned Auden the National Book Award. The goddess Thetis watched as Hephaestus made armor for her son Achilles. Thetis expected the armor's surface to feature images of lush greenery, dignified societies, and ships navigating free, wide waters. Instead, Hephaestus forged onto the shining shield the image of a man made wasteland and a grey, heavy sky. This land was a totally empty, brown plain without any grass nor any sign of community. There was no food at all and no place to rest. Still, there was a hazy throng of soldiers gathered on this barren landscape. There were a ton of them, all lined up and expressionless as they waited for their orders. The voice of some unknown figure filled the air and listed data points as justification for the soldiers going off the battle. The voice was stark and flat and as emotionless as the landscape itself. The voice didn't make anyone more excited or eager for the battle, but there was no further discussion. One after the other, the soldiers fell out, kicking up dust in their wake. They held on to the reasoning behind their orders, even though this ultimately led them to despair. Barbed wire surrounded a random place where bored fishes laced about. Some even made jokes while the gods were sweating in the heat. Meanwhile, a group of average, reasonable townspeople looked on silently while three pale individuals were shackled to stakes that were then driven into the ground. These three lives, with all their beauty and significance, all that they held dear, were equal to the lives of everyone else. However, their fate was now out of their control. They were powerless and had no hope that anyone would help them, and indeed, no one did. Their captors simply did what captors do, and all that the worst among the crowd could hope for was the victims would feel shame. The three figures were stripped of their dignity and humanity before they physically died. Thetis kept watching as Hephaestus worked. She looked for images of athletes competing while men and women danced swiftly, swaying their beautiful bodies along to music. But in place of a dance floor, Hephaestus forged a field utterly overrun with weeds which strangled any vegetation. An unkempt mischief making boy strolled around that empty field. He tried to hit a bird with a rock, but although he aimed accurately, the bird was able to fly out of harm's way. For this young boy, it was just an accepted part of life that girls get sexually abused and that boys physically harm one another. He was unaware of any place where people actually kept their promises or were sensitive to the suffering of others. Without saying anything, the stern metal worker Hephaestus staggered away. Thetis, whose chest shone like shield, let out a distressed cry upon seeing what he had created for her son Achilles. Was a strong cry upon seeing, let out a distressed cry upon seeing what he had created for her son Achilles. She saw that although Achilles was a strong, hardened killer, he would soon die. The shield as a tool of war now reflects the truth. These descriptions of a barren landscape are also interspersed with evidence of personal suffering, further dispelling any romantic notions of wartime heroes. That is the mother's exception, whatever she may be a goddess or whatever it may be, but the mother expects the son to be alive and his shield should be uh, beautifully arranged, carved. But instead Hephaestus forging he is making the carvings opposite to the view of the mother. That is, these descriptions of a barren landscape are also interspersed with evidence of personal suffering, further displaying any romantic notions of wartime heroism. For instance, the soldiers who file off to war ultimately experience grief as a result of other orders. They are also not moved by passion or moral conviction, but rather by dry statistics delivered by some destined commander, making their suffering and death seem all the more cruel and arbitrary. The poem's final stanza then reveals that the strong, iron hearted man slaying Achilles will also meet his death. This scene will not be accepted, was not be accepted by Thetis. So she cries out loud and go on, go. This characterization of Achilles emphasizes the war does not spare even the most powerful and determined of soldiers. In this, the shield is an ornate work of art that depicts war as an integral part of a desirable society. It is as much a decoration as a tool, and its intricate imagery is meant to be beautiful. This poem, however, imagines what the shield would look like if its aesthetic concerns were stripped away, leaving behind candid images of war's actual impact. The speaker contrasts the spectacular expectations of war that the original shield creates with war's grim realities in order to question the legitimacy of art that takes war as its subject. That is, the poem seems to wonder whether any art concerned with aesthetics, with being beautiful, can fully capture the truth of something as horrific as war. The elaborate, idealized scenes of life in wartime that fill the original shield create a romantic image of war. For instance, Thetis expects the Hephaestus will forge ships on untamed seas and athletes at their games, appearing alongside scenes of war. These portraits of bravery and adventure promote battle as valorous and exhilarating experiences. Plus, the cities the soldiers protect are marble and well governed. Such stately descriptions dignify their task. The original shield is also full of naturalistic beauty, lush vegetation, white flower, garlanded hyphus, and dancers moving their sweet lips. This visually striking and idealized backdrop for violence implicitly presents war as an important part of utopian society. Throughout the poem, the speaker describes the captivating imagery that covers the original shield in vivid detail. In doing so, the speaker signals that the shield glorifies war by appealing to the audience's aesthetic sensibilities. On the other hand, the speaker's modern reinterpretation of the shield is characterized by austerity and desolation. The shield scenery is barren and without a feature. In fact, the speaker lists all the sustenance that isn't present on the shield. No blade of grass, no sign of a neighborhood, nothing to eat, and nowhere to sit down. When structures finally appear, they are no less bleak concentration camps surrounded by barbed wire. The figures that occupy these landscapes are similarly lifeless. The townspeople are not described as pious, active, or dignified as they are in the Iliad. Instead, they are silent and motionless as they witness mass torture. In the Iliad, the gleaming shield gives both Thetis and Achilles a sense of great pride and empowerment, but it turns out to be a little more than a work of art, failing to protect him from death. The modern shield more closely resembles the eye opening documentary photography taken during World War II. As a result, Thetis is uncomfortably aware of her son's fate. The speaker thus suggests that the preconception of war's purpose and impacts are set by Homer or insufficient preparation for the horrific realities of war. As such, the poem itself can be taken as an example of a more responsible and complete account of war, which implicitly advises the reader against taking its own portrayal of its act. Thank you.